Good evening, afternoon, night, morning, whenever you find a way to listen to this podcast, excuse me. It is me, Omar Rashan Borja, the Burger Popper, joined again by my good friend Bobby Wilson of the TNT College Football Podcast. We're back with another Lambert Trophy preview for the week. And again, not officially branded by Lambert Trophy, just doing this because we both have a love of teams in the Northeast and experience covering teams in the Northeast. But man, if there was any a such thing as a judgment week or a judgment day for the Lambert Trophy, I'd say that this week was it. But before we dive into it, Bobby, how's everything going?
Going great, Omar. As always, thank you for having me. Love talking with you, ball and off air. Just it's always great talking with you. And excited for the week that's coming up. From the Lambert Trophy perspective, with the teams playing, we got 10 teams playing this week, two off. Um, but like you said, last weekend was a big week with a lot of movement.
Yeah, absolutely. And of course, we would be amiss not talking about the big game of the week, big noon kickoff college game day, of course, being there. A little bit of jawing back and forth about or maybe I think it was just Pat McAfee talking about how small the big noon kickoff set was. But Penn State losing to Ohio State, and I'll be honest, I thought this was the year that Penn State would beat Ohio State. And they didn't, unfortunately. I have to say I didn't watch that game at all because I was locked in on Army Air Force single screen, no multi-view for me. But looking at the Penn State play calling at the goal line, it was very uninspired. I'm just surprised they didn't work in Tyler Warren at all in the fourth and goal. I'm not as much an X's and O's guy as I am a rider, but man, really disappointing for Penn State. But yet I somehow don't think that James Franklin is exactly on the hot seat because of the 12-team playoff that Penn State should fit comfortably in the 12-team playoff with their remaining schedule. But man, Bobby, do you have any initial thoughts about Penn State's loss to Ohio State and any impacts it has on the Lambert Trophy race?
Well, I mean, personally, watching that game, I'm just gonna say it how it is. I mean, it was a snoozer, honestly. I mean, like Penn State got off to a good start, 10-0, and you're thinking, okay, maybe it's happening. Maybe this is finally coming through for them this year. And then credit to Will Howard after throwing an interception. He leads a fantastic drive, uh, proves his worth as a quarterback. I mean, he was fantastic on that next drive. At the same time, though, like you said, the play calling on the goal line in multiple situations, we just kind of head scratching. Um, Correct me if I'm wrong. Tyler Warren was their leading rusher, I want to say, for the game. Um, it's it's just you just question again James Franklin in these big games, in particular Ohio State. You just look down the line of what's happened while he's been there. The one win in an extended period of time. And like we said, if there was going to be a year, it needed to be this year because they had a real opportunity here. And Ohio State allowed them to have chances at it. Penn State just didn't take it. And unfortunately for them, it puts them behind the eight ball. I mean, yes, they're more than likely going to make the playoff. But in my personal opinion, if you watch them play, what what really makes you think that even if they're hosting a playoff game, whoever they're playing, I just feel like they're going to have more firepower. If they're playing an SEC team, odds are it'd be the likes of Tennessee, Ole Miss, LSU, maybe Texas, maybe Georgia, whoever doesn't win the SEC, Alabama even, like just more offensive firepower. And yes, Penn State has a very solid defense, but I just think the firepower could be too much for them. And from the Lambert Trophy perspective, they're still in the running, of course. I mean, I think it's a clear three-team race. I would say at this point, maybe four. But at the same time, I mean, they're right there with plenty left in front of them, obviously. But they can't lose anymore. That's for sure.
Yeah, I agree. And so I guess I'm going to ask first your top five for the Lambert, then I'll give mine with that before I propose a scenario. But like you said, Bobby, like if this was a year Ohio State lost to Oregon, almost lost to Nebraska. I mean, like you said, there's nothing else to say. And I did check too. I was unaware that Tyler Warren was the leading rusher on Penn State. And that's surprising with the talent that they have a running back with Nick Singleton and just what Penn State's known for producing running backs. I mean, for decades now, that would be the case in such a big game like this.
Hmm. Well, Ohio State's defensive coordinator has been able to do things to stifle Penn State throughout the past handful of years, and it's really it's glaring just the difference that you see between Penn State's offense compared to Ohio State's defense. Penn State's able to run the football against almost every team all year long, but as soon as they play Ohio State, they just hit a wall and nothing, and it's just not working.
Yeah, it is quite strange indeed. But so Bobby, going on to the top five for your Lambert Trophy rankings, who do you have this week and how did it change?
Okay, so at number five, I first off want to say I kind of went through this for number five. I put there's three teams that I really sat there and I thought long and hard about this. I really did, and I know for number five they're out of the race, but I wanted to make it as I wanted to make a good list as best I could. West Virginia at 4-4, 3-2 in the Big 12 still has a chance, albeit a very small chance, to play in the Big 12 title game. Their game against Cincinnati is huge from that perspective. Navy, of course, being 6-2, 4-1 in the AAC now, is still in the running for the AAC title, albeit a smaller opportunity, but the window is still there for them to do so. I I don't want to sound like a homer, but I put UConn at number five because we beat Rice. Navy didn't beat Rice. That was my criteria for that. I took West Virginia out just because of being a 500 overall football team. I understand that their four losses are to ranked teams that are having very successful seasons this year, but I went with UConn. They have multiple Lambert Trophy wins this year against teams in the running. They have a couple more coming up at the end of the year here. Um, 6-3 bowl eligibility at UConn is huge. Obviously, most people know I do a lot of work when it comes to UConn football. So, like I said, I don't want to sound like a homer, but I'm going with them here at number five. Number four, I put Syracuse. I think it's clear that they're deserving of being top four. Really good win this week for them against Virginia Tech, albeit against Virginia Tech's backup quarterback and running backs. But at the end of the day, they got it done. No drones or Bilal Tootin at running back. Drones at quarterback, Tootin at running back. So that obviously hurt Virginia Tech in this game. But still, kudos to Syracuse for getting a good win. Number three, I put Pittsburgh. I see they're top three. They only got one loss. Yes, the loss was handily by SMU this past weekend, but still they're deserving to be up there. They beat Syracuse handily, so they definitely deserve to be ahead of them. At number two, I put Penn State. Yes, they had a really rough performance this past week, but I think it's still clear that they're one of the top teams um, in the country, and then also obviously the Lambert Trophy rankings. And at number one, I'm putting Army because they're the only undefeated team. They have everything in front of them to win the AAC, win the Commander in Chief Trophy, make the college football playoff even. Everything's right in front of them. They're having an absolutely special season. I know fans might look at their previous this week's game against Air Force and say, "Oh, they only won 20-3." Well, there's a definitive reason why that happened. You obviously can talk about that, Omar. That's your bunch, but they're clicking. I expect him to be back this week because they got a huge one this week against North Texas.
Yeah, I mean, absolutely. So even me as an Army fan, it's ironic that I'm not the one putting Army at number one. Full disclaimer. So for my top five, this was tough for me. I think for me, I had to put Navy at number five still, but I didn't factor in the Rice game really because I look at Navy's resume. The win over Memphis is good, but it's losing its luster a little bit after Memphis just lost to UTSA. But the transitive win, like you said, UConn's interchangeable there. But in my mind too, I think about the 48-point loss to Maryland in the back of my mind. I know that happened in week one. This is a different UConn team, but interchangeable. Might even go 5A and 5B with UConn and Navy, honestly. Number four, I put Syracuse. I mean, for the same reasons as you did, really. Really a good win, but with a head-to-head loss to Pitt in by a pretty big margin. They are behind Pitt at number three. So Pitt at number three. And of course, they dropped from the two spot for me after their blowout loss to SMU. I mean, they could gain some ground if they beat Clemson, excuse me, because debatably, if they beat Clemson, they'll have a better resume than Army with, especially Army with a loss to Notre Dame. So number two, I have Army. Just before, I mean, I might even bump Army to number one next week if they take care of business against North Texas. Bump them over Penn State just because that would be their first win and or first, I guess, first win over a team with a winning record right now. I guess second now that East Carolina just absolutely embarrassed FAU, honestly, a couple hours ago. So, I mean, Army could bump up in the standings later on if those wins gain more weight against, or if that win against East Carolina gains more weight, which looks like it will. East Carolina's playing like a complete squad, but Army hasn't really been tested by tough opposition. I'm not holding the Air Force game against them at all. It's a rivalry game, and it was a backup quarterback, and a completely different scheme that Army was running. Not even completely different, I should say, but a lot of different wrinkles in the shotgun with Dwayne Coleman at quarterback. And then number one, I have Penn State, with which the scenario I wanted to bring up, Bobby, and ask you about is say Penn State wins out at 11 and 1, and then they don't make the Big Ten title game. So they stay at 11 and 1 in the regular season. Army beats Notre Dame, and the Army beats Notre Dame, goes 13 and 0, wins over, say, Tulane, probably a two-loss Tulane squad. Would you then give Army the nod for the Lambert Trophy with the win over Notre Dame, despite Penn State playing a Big Ten schedule?
Personally, I would, just because I feel like they're most deserving at that point. You beat all comers on your schedule. Everybody that was put in front of you, you took care of business and did what you needed to do. I understand they're not playing in the Big Ten, but at the end of the day, beating Notre Dame, that's a very solid win. And I would argue that that's a better win than Penn State has on their schedule at that point. Yes, I think we all understand Penn State playing in the much more difficult conference does need to play a factor into it. Um, but at the end of the day, the one game that they really needed to win, they just didn't. But like we've said, like they are clearly right here in the running for the award. I mean, it's like we said, I think it's kind of a three team race at this point with Pittsburgh, Penn State, and Army, and they all have um, big games ahead of them. Pittsburgh, like you said, they got Clemson coming up. Army obviously has multiple big games coming up with North Texas, Notre Dame, Navy. If they make, they probably are going to make the AAC title game against say Tulane. So they got a lot in front of them. I say if they run the table against that, that's a really impressive showing, and I think they're very deserving.
Yeah, I would have to agree, honestly, and not just out of partisanship for being a an Army fan, but like you said, the Notre Dame win would have a lot of weight because if Army beats Notre Dame, Notre Dame likely ends up at 10 and 2, and Penn State's best win is against a at best 9-3 Illinois team. I don't think Illinois loses another game, but they won't. I don't think they'll blow anyone else remaining on their schedule out. I don't think they'll blow out Michigan State this week. I don't think they'll blow out Rutgers, especially with the way that Rutgers plays in a couple weeks from now. And I don't think they'll blow out Northwestern in the rivalry game. So even then with that kind of, I guess, in my mind, a one score spread in those games, I don't think that Illinois, I think Illinois could be upset and be dropped down to 8-4, and then is Penn State's best win against an 8-4 Illinois squad, which is which pales in comparison if Army were to beat Notre Dame. And like the criteria of the Lambert Trophy says, this is about the most deserving team, or sorry, not most deserving, most accomplished team. And Army beating Notre Dame for the first time since 1968. I want to say, I don't know how much the win streak, the losing streak is at. It's nowhere close to where Navy's was when they were losing to Notre Dame every year from the 60s to the mid 2000s. But I want to say it's like around 19 or 20. And then, of course, no wins in the past over 60, almost 70 years. Excuse me. Definitely a huge accomplishment for the program that adds to it. Where you look at Penn State, 11-1 season, 11-1 regular season, no conference championship game appearance. There isn't really much accomplishment there. So I
Mhm.
think the wording of the award kind of works against Penn State's favor in this argument.
I agree, and I also wonder, and I believe this would be the case as well. Say they lose to Notre Dame, but it's in a very close game, and then they continue on. I think that even at that point, there's arguments to be made that they are still deserving for the award by going on to win their conference championship and losing in a good fashion against a good Notre Dame team. Yes, Ohio State or Penn State, I'm sorry, lost to Ohio State by a touchdown, but they wouldn't have won their conference championship in this scenario.
Yes, I agree too. Like you mentioned the conference championship, and I think debatably too, a win over 10-2, 10-3 Tulane is even a better win than Illinois would be than a win
Mm-hmm.
over eight and
Mm-hmm.
four, or sorry, 9-3. Definitely 8-4 Illinois would be. So that's a great scenario too. So I mean, geez, I'm not ruling out Army at all, but I mean, there's more scenarios than just the beat Notre Dame scenario, like you just mentioned, to them winning the Lambert Trophy. So the race definitely got interesting with the loss to, or more interesting with Penn State's loss to Ohio State. So I'm excited to see how the next few weeks unfold with the race. Looks really open. It's just amazing to see.
Absolutely. And like we said, I mean, Pitt still has an opportunity in front of them. I mean, they play Clemson. If they get that win, Clemson just lost against Louisville and looked pretty pretty average in that performance. So it's in front of the table for Pittsburgh too. Yes, they might need Penn State to lose another game. Penn State goes to Minnesota in a few weeks. So that would be a bad loss for Penn State. But Minnesota is having a successful year this year. Washington could give Penn State a run this week, coming off of a high against Ohio State, coming off of a very, very difficult game there. Maybe Washington comes in. Yes, they're coming across the country, and we've kind of seen how that's played out from the Big Ten perspective. But we've seen crazier things happen this year than that.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, like you said, I'm not ruling out Washington upsetting Penn State at all, especially with the game being a later kick. If it was a noon
Mm-hmm.
kickoff, I can definitely understand it, but this is a primetime
Mm-hmm.
kickoff, so time won't really be that much of a factor, which I like how you mentioned Rutgers or Minnesota because I guess looking at the schedule, we can dive into the games. Minnesota Rutgers, man, that's a game that I'm excited about because it's a good old-fashioned running back duel. Kyle
Yes.
Monangai versus Darius Taylor. Darius Taylor, he hasn't really reached the level he reached in last year's Quick Lane Bowl when he had 40 carries and ran for over 200 against Bowling Green, but he's having a solid year. He looks like he can exceed 1,000 yards, I think, with a bowl game under his belt. But like you said, Minnesota's having a nice year slowly. It always seems that PJ Flex teams when they're having good years, not of course like I guess not of course like 2019 when they're having a year like that, but when they're having good years where they end 8-4, 9-3. They always seem like the late bloomers. Like we always write off. I know I always write off Minnesota as like not being a solid team at all, but I mean they have really picked it up. And you mentioned the Penn State game. Like they are a legitimate upset threat against Penn State. But this week they have Rutgers. I love how this game's on NBC at noon. It's great exposure for Rutgers in Minnesota. It's great to see that I guess the network TV love is being spread all throughout the Big Ten. But Rutgers needs this game, I think, with their remaining schedule because I don't think Rutgers looks like a bowl team at all. I don't think that their defense is equipped to make a run in these next four games. But at this game will show a lot against a red hot Minnesota team at noon on NBC.
I gotta agree with you when it comes to the spread that the national TV, the letter networks, we'll call them, well, what they're doing when it comes to spreading the love for the Big Ten teams. I think I saw this week that Purdue is getting the CBS game against Penn State next week. I think is what I saw, which is that a big game because Purdue's not very good this year, but still, it's good to see that they're spreading it out, like you said here. I mean, Rutgers getting a big time exposure game on NBC, like you said, with the running back matchup, it's going to be fun to watch those guys play. Um, I think this is a must-win game for Rutgers, like you were saying, for bowl eligibility perspectives. They play, I would say they play better at home, but they lost against UCLA. But UCLA is playing better, so we'll give them some credit. But at the end of the day, like you said, I mean, Rutgers needs to get this one done. I just don't know if they can with how Minnesota's playing. Ever since they played Michigan, they came back in that game, had an opportunity to beat Michigan in the Big House, and since then they've played really, really solid football, beating the likes of USC, Illinois this past week at Illinois. They've done a really, really solid. Both those teams were ranked at the time when they did that. I mean, obviously now they're not, but still, this is a resurgence, I'll say, for Minnesota, especially the way they started the year this year, losing to North Carolina, the way that they lost that game. I think we were all kind of questioning, like, okay, could PJ Fleck not be the right guy potentially? And the turnaround they've had this year has been very, very impressive, and I got to give them credit.
Yeah, absolutely. And I know a lot of people were wondering if PJ Fleck had hit his ceiling after last year's year where they finished 6-7, 5-7 in the regular season. But it looks like PJ Fleck has Minnesota is back and running again, and they might be a year away from a playoff bid on the back end. I mean, if they string together a 10-2 season, get a couple of big wins, I think that they look like a contender for a playoff berth. But that game looks exciting to me. Monungai and Taylor leading the way at running back, and also too the Ethan Kaliak-Manis payback game. A
Yeah,
very underrated storyline there in the transfer portal era. So that's what I'm. That's a storyline I'm excited to see how it plays out.
I was going to allow you to say his name just because
It's
I don't want
hard.
to butcher it.
It's so hard. Yeah, it's man, yeah, I'm gonna have to edit that out to somehow make it seem like I didn't butcher it as bad.
Kudos
Um,
to you.
yeah, I mean, in my head, I was like, "Oh, I got it," but man, when the big moment came, I slipped up. But staying in
Well,
the
it was
in
a
the
lot better
news,
than I would have done.
yeah, it's just hard. But he's having a solid year at quarterback
He
for
is. He
Rutgers.
really is.
So, I mean, hopefully he can perform well against his old coaching staff. Um, Staying in the noon slot, we have Cuse versus BC, and it's just a great week for all eras of the Big East. You have an original Big East matchup with Cuse BC. You have West Virginia Cincy, which we'll talk about in a few. But this one's really fascinating to me because the secondary, and I'm sure you've gone into detail on this one, Bobby, on a podcast, but the secondary of BC versus Syracuse's three-headed monster at receiver of Trevor Pena, Jackson Meeks, and Oronde Gadsden, who Oronde Gadsden has had the quietest, if you can say that, quietest season of the three, surprisingly. But man, those three have almost 500 yards each. And Boston College, you know they're going to play strong defense. They have a great pass rush led by Donovan. You're going to let me say this one again, Donovan. He's a Ezra Ruako, 9 sacks, 12 tackles for loss. But the craziest thing too is Boston College has 11 interceptions. The interception totals spread across the secondary and linebacking core. So there really isn't one, I guess, dominant defensive back. Syracuse is going to have a real test with that pass offense with Kyle McCord against Boston College. So I'm interested to see that one. That one is on the CW. Great to see those two schools getting attention on the alphabet numbers, as you say.
I think this game's going to come down to turnovers. Does Kyle McCord throw multiple interceptions in this game? If he does, I think BC is going to be able to take care of this one. If Kyle McCord takes care of the football, they're going to be able to spread it out, move it down the field, and I think they're going to be able to do what they need to do to beat BC in this game. I think it really just comes down to that, in my opinion. I am intrigued to see this as well as again UConn plays Syracuse in a couple weeks, so I'm that's a huge game for us. So I'm really, of course, from the rivalry perspective, the Big East perspective, and everything, an opportunity for UConn to beat an ACC opponent. So I'm really looking at Syracuse these next couple weeks, especially for me and the work that I do moving forward in the next couple weeks with UConn football. But also because Syracuse has an outside chance of potentially still winning the Lambert Trophy, albeit small. But if they win out, take care of business, and the teams in front of them lose multiple games, there's a possibility, again, albeit small. But it comes down to, like I said this week, I think the biggest thing in this game is just turnovers. If BC turns the ball over a few times, I think it plays right into what Syracuse needs. If Syracuse turns it over a couple times, BC is going to take care of business, I feel.
Yeah, that's a great point about the turnovers, Bobby. I do agree with that. And Boston College is a very opportunistic defense. And who knows if those turnovers will help them if they build an early lead, if it will help them stay on top, unlike they did against Louisville, and prevent Syracuse, who just came off a big comeback themselves, from coming back and beating BC. But they need this game really for bowl eligibility with some of the games that they have coming up. I think they have SMU for sure, and I want to say that they also have Miami or someone else in the top echelon of the ACC.
Miami, yeah.
Okay, so they definitely need this one then. There really is there's very little room for error for the Eagles in this one, but rivalry game, very vintage feel there too. So I mean, could lift the Eagles to victory. So back to the Big East as mentioned are staying in former Big East, West Virginia versus Cincinnati, and this is the Big East that I grew up with after the 2005 expansion. So this one's very interesting to me because I really feel like I don't really know what to make of the middle of the Big 12, whether West Virginia is a bowl team or even Cincinnati or Baylor or UCF and Tech, or I mean not even Texas Tech, sorry, but Baylor, UCF, that middle kind of crop of those four teams. I'm not sure if those teams are bowl teams. West Virginia has had quarterback injuries with Garrett Green, who's had a very nice year quietly in that conference in the midst of all that great quarterback play. Just a great dual threat this year. But Nico Marchiol had 198 yards, 2 touchdowns, and no interceptions against Arizona. I'm kind of iffy on West Virginia because they didn't beat Arizona very decisively. Like they didn't absolutely expose them like UCF did last week. So I'm kind of interested to see if West Virginia is a legitimate bowl contender because I just don't really know at this point.
I don't know if anybody about that middle of the Big 12. That's just that league has just eaten itself up. Just teams beating each other up, and it's fun for viewing for us fans, but it does make it difficult for guys like us that are trying to like predict what's going to happen, especially for you with your bowl projection. That's got to be difficult just because you don't know week in, week out what you're going to get from some of these teams. I think Cincinnati being at home is big in this game. I know that they didn't have the greatest performance against Colorado a couple weeks ago, but there were things in that game. I've been very, very impressed with Colorado and how they've grown as a program. I feel like they're doing a good job playing and letting their play speak for itself instead of blowing things up like they've been doing. I feel like they've done a much better job with that this year, and they're improved in the trenches for sure, exponentially. And it showed in that game against Cincinnati. But I think Cincinnati now can take that into this game against West Virginia and utilize some of those advantages they have against them. Like you said, West Virginia's had some injuries throughout the year that have hindered them, and I'm just gonna in this game. I think it's gonna be close, and I'm gonna go with the home team in this situation, just in a very close game.
Yeah, I have to agree. I think I'm gonna have to go with Cincinnati here. And I'm pretty sure Cincinnati has it at home. I have to check in. Is
Yeah,
Cincinnati the home team?
yeah,
Oh yeah,
it is.
I
Yeah.
think I saw. Yeah, I mean, I think I'll have to go with Cincinnati as well, just based on their resume. And I just think if there's still quarterback trouble with Garrett Green, I do think that also plays a role in it. Even though Marshall played great, I do think that West Virginia wants to have Garrett Green more at the quarterback position. So definitely a game to watch. And like you said, I mean, I didn't catch the Cincinnati Colorado game, but they did play the Buffaloes close. And like you said, I mean, it seemed like there were, from what I heard, it seemed like there were things to draw and have hope on for West Virginia or for Cincinnati in that game. So moving on
Hmm.
to West Virginia's arch rivals in Pitt. Pitt has a chance at a good get back game against Virginia. Virginia, of course, fighting for a bowl bid in the middle of the ACC, which is also a little bit difficult to predict. Not as difficult as the middle of the Big 12, but I think this is a good get back game for Pitt because Eli Holstein faces a UVA defense that allows 275 passing yards per game. Yet I think Pitt might struggle with Anthony Colandrea's kind of wild style of play and everything. But just an interesting get back game for Pitt. I think Pitt is motivated to show everyone that they are a legitimate contender in the conference and try to salvage what they can in the ACC race. So I think Pitt returns strongly in this one against UVA.
I do as well. I think they're going to bounce back this week. But I will say, I think that we also have to look at the scenario that they could be a letdown opportunity for them. They they were exposed a lot by SMU last week. SMU is a very, very talented team, and they put it to them. So it's on film for Virginia to see. Okay, we can attack them in these certain areas, and I'm not saying Virginia has the same athletes with that capability as SMU does, but it's on film at least for you to see where you can attack them. Pitt has played better at home this year, so I like that opportunity for them here. Virginia's on a losing streak, but like you said, I mean they're competing to get to bowl eligibility, and I think that that's something that not a lot of us thought we would be saying at this point in the year when it comes to Virginia football. So kudos to them for that, where they're at this season. But like we said, I think this is a really good bounce back opportunity for Pitt. But at the same time, I think we also need to have in the back of our mind it could be a letdown opportunity as well.
That's a good point about the letdown for sure. They're definitely something to look out for, and especially with Virginia fighting for a bowl eligibility, like you said. And this will be their first bowl appearance if Virginia ends up pulling out 6 wins. It'll be their first bowl appearance. It's a tragedy, the tragic shooting that claimed the lives of 3 players in 2022. So this program is still fighting I guess, really um, overcome that moment. And a bowl game helps to some degree, of course. I'm not going to say a bowl game provides all the healing or heals all the ills and sadness from that event, but definitely something that still is heavy on the hearts of UVA players. A lot of players who were on the team when that occurred. So. Definitely interesting matchup there. A lot of motivations on and off the field for both teams. So going on or moving on from the ACC, going on to the American Navy USF. So a game that my wife and I will be attending. For that one, I'm just interested in how Navy bounces back. And again, I think if you look at this one a couple weeks ago when USF was still struggling after losing Byron Brown at quarterback, I think this is a game that you look at Navy wins easily, but Navy has two straight losses. They just lost to Rice. USF's offense has gained their rhythm with Bryce Archie at quarterback. More so, the run game is able to take the weight off Archie with a great performance it had against Florida Atlantic last week. So this one, I think it's going to be a really close game. And strangely enough, with all the oddities, I think this is the craziest oddity in the American. These schools have been in the American together since 2015. This is just their third meeting as conference teams and nine as conference
Wow.
members together
Wow.
because they're in different divisions, of course. Navy in the West, USF in the East. The teams were supposed to meet in 2020, but the pandemic canceled that game. And that was and I think that was let's see. Okay, sorry, it's not the third. I think it's the fourth meeting. Sorry, the fourth meeting in 9 years. So they're supposed to meet in 2024 and 2020 during the pandemic. But of course, that changed things, and I think a new scheduling cycle started. And so when they met in 2023, that was the first meeting since 2016. That wild game, the last game that they played at the Rage 8 on that Friday night game when Will Worth threw for like over 300 yards coming from behind, but just a
Come
really,
on.
really weird
Yeah.
oddity that these teams have not really played much in the conference. So, but really, I mean, this is a crucial point for Navy because Navy controls its destiny still in the American, but they can't afford any room for error, especially before the Tulane game.
I absolutely agree. I think there it's either this game comes down to USF's clicking, they're playing better, significantly better than what they had been playing just a few weeks ago, even. I like the way that they're doing things, clicking at the right time. They're going to get the bowl eligibility. I firmly believe that. I think they're going to win this game. I think Navy's kind of reeling. I think they were really, really exposed against Notre Dame. I think they've they've turned the ball over. That's the key with them is they've just turned the ball over, especially these last two losses against Notre Dame and Rice, where you're just that's not who they are. If they don't turn the ball over against USF, I think they win this football game. But if they have two or more turnovers in this game, I think USF can win the game by a convincing margin. So again, I think this game comes down to even something as simple as that, the turnover margin in this game. But I'm going to give it to USF because of I'm more convinced in what I'm seeing right now.
Yeah, I would have to I'm gonna say Navy still takes it to be honest with you. But like you said, the turnovers. I mean, if Blake Horvath just continues to try to, I guess play outside of himself to like make up for other happenings on the field and throw interceptions that he wasn't throwing before the Notre Dame game, then I do think, like you said, like this game could be a wider margin than anticipated. USF looks like again, they're like Minnesota, they're late bloomers, it seems like. Last year they had the late surge to get to a bowl game. This year seems like the same with Alex Golesh figuring things out. And then I think too, like with what happened last week on Friday night against FAU, at the end of the game, I think that's like a rallying point for the team. The team's getting their swagger
Absolutely.
back, rallying
Yeah.
behind their coach and everything. So I guess I want your thoughts, Bobby, as a former college coach on that whole situation. Yeah, just I guess your thoughts on it. I guess on both sides, if you're on either end of the exchange, like how you would feel. Which I don't think you do anything like what Alex Golesh did, but I just want your thoughts.
Yeah. I mean, I've never really. I should say it. I mean, thinking back to like JUCO basketball, there's some interesting things that happen in that world from a coaching standpoint. So you look at some of the things that happen between coaches at that level. Um, you just kind of shake your head. But at the same time, like what happened in that game, it boils down to what happened last year too. I mean, that's why Coach Golish responded the way that he did, and I personally don't have any issues with it. If you're going to run the score the year before, and then you're going to get upset about what Coach Golish did this year, you got to be able to take it and receive it. Like I said, I don't really have an issue with what happened. I personally don't see that much wrong with it. I know the media is going to play it up, and I don't know if you ask these two fan bases, like, is it a budding rivalry? I don't know if you ask USF fans, if you say, hey, what are your thoughts about FAU? Like, if they even would say like that it's even a rivalry. I don't, but I don't know. I would have to ask some of their fans that just to see like, hey, what like how much of a rivalry is this to you guys? FAU's having a really rough year this year. They can't stop anybody defensively. It's it's rough for them. So I mean, I think that has a lot to do with it too. Like Tom Herman's got to be just extremely frustrated, and then kind of that just kind of boils over. I think that's just kind of it.
Yeah, I think that's a good point too, like you said about last year, because the context was lost on me until I guess until after the game. And I'm like, he really went for an onside kick up 42. Like that's actually pretty ridiculous. I
Yeah,
think going for two, like for me, I could defend Golesh going for two from a tactical perspective because that's stealing a possession. You make a 23-point game to a 25-point game. So at the surface, I don't find anything wrong with it because you're
right, right.
you're limiting the possessions. Like you're creating another possession that USF or FAU needs. So I don't see a problem with it. But man, yeah, with all the context, I love it. And I think I get the feeling that I think USF thinks they're above FAU just with them being a former Sunbelt member, USF being a former Big East member and everything and being an elder statesman of the AAC. So I do see USF being above them, thinking that they're above FAU and FAU wanted to make that a rivalry. So definitely very interesting too. And turns out, so I was a little bit wrong on the Navy before I move on to the next game on the Navy stat clarification. This is the fifth meeting all time. The 2023 meeting was the first since 2019. I forgot that Navy had played USF during that great year. But in the pandemic, that was the second half of the home and home, I guess, within the conference. So they didn't reschedule that. So 2023 was the first meeting since 2019, with the 2019 game being played in Annapolis. So going on, staying with a team or a game involving a team in the American, UConn versus UAB, a game, Bobby, that you are very invested in. Of course, UConn is 6-3. Something interesting that I found about this game that is particularly important to UConn fans. This is their first trip to Birmingham since the 2010 PapaJohns.com Bowl, where they ended the year where Jasper Howard is tragically killed. They ended that year with a bowl win over South Carolina in that bowl game. They beat Notre Dame that year. So I really feel that with heavy hearts, UConn will play well. I think Coach Mora, I don't, of course, I'm not in the locker room. I don't cover the team, but I feel like Coach Mora will tell that story as it's still very important to the UConn team. Something I'm interested in though is UAB came out of nowhere to drop 59 on Tulsa. I mean, UConn's got a great pass defense, less than 200 yards per game, less than 6 yards per attempt. I mean, I'm not sure how Jalen Kitna will do against UConn, but that is definitely a matchup to watch now after the way he played against Tulsa this past week.
Yeah, I mean that performance for UAB kind of came up out of nowhere. The one thing I will say about UAB is if you look at their six losses, it's against teams that are bowl eligible or that are going to be bowl eligible, I'll say. So you got to give them a little benefit of the doubt there. But however, they played very poorly against run heavy teams. That's what UConn wants to do. They're very productive at it. Um, I think Nick Evers at quarterback is going to bounce back this week. He just needs to trust his instincts and deliver the football. I know Coach Moore is a defensive oriented coach, and he wants him to take care of the football. so the defense can go out there and win games. But Pete and I, Pete Cowan, my co-host for our UConn football chat that we do each and every week, we both said like he's got to come out and just trust his instincts and trust his arm, trust the skills that he has, and put some throws out there that are difficult to make. Like even if you make a mistake, like the great ones make mistakes, they learn from it, they move on. Like hey, you're gonna throw a pick at some point. That's it's football. It's playing quarterback. You just can't play tentative. Is what we've kind of been seeing recently. But got to give UAB credit for their performance last week against Tulsa. Tulsa's not very good, but at the same time, like UAB had been playing poorly, and they came out there threw for 404 yards, or Kitna threw for 404 yards. I will say, before this game, he had only thrown for 800 something yards, and he had, I believe, six. He had four touchdowns to six interceptions. He's been sacked 24. I want to say UAB's given up 24 sacks this year, so that's three a game. UConn is they'll blitz, they'll get to you. The linebackers at UConn have played tremendous this year, flying all over the place. I think this is the game where we're going to be able to get to Kitna and get a couple sacks and really rattle him into throwing some interceptions. We had some really solid plays against Georgia State last week from an interception perspective, where you could tell our guys really watched the film and broke it down, and they knew where some of these routes were going for Georgia State, and they were able to make really good reads on what they were trying to do. And I can see that this week with UAB as well. I trust our guys to go into Birmingham, get a victory in this one. Like you said, with everything from that 2018 season, I guarantee that is, like you said with Coach Mora, this is something that's being told to the guys, preached to them from that season. This is an important game, not only because it's the next game for UConn football, but it's also an opportunity for UConn to get a seventh win, which would then mean a winning season for the first time in a very long
Yes, I think you'd have to go back to 2010 to the last time that UConn had a winning season because they have made two bowl appearances in 2022 and 2015, but that was as a 6-6 team and both losses to Marshall to make them 6-7. So you hit the nail on the head, of course, Bobby, with your UConn coverage and with this, just mentioning the importance of the game, just really crucial here. So staying in the American. Army, North Texas, of course, we were getting to this game. This game is, of course, one of the most important games of the weekend. Man, I'd be lying if I said that North Texas didn't scare me. That this game didn't scare me. Has the potential to be like the 2017 game, a game that was 52-49, just a back and forth affair, and ended with North Texas winning 52-49 in a game-winning field goal with under 10 seconds left. So I'd be lying if I said I wasn't scared. But the good thing is, it's like North Texas is very weak against the run and against just defenses in general. Looking back, North Texas almost lost to Florida Atlantic, and they let Cam Fancher throw for over 300 yards, which before that point or up to that point, he had not thrown for over 200 yards in a game against anybody. So he threw for 300 against North Texas for Florida Atlantic. So hopefully Bryson Daly's back, but I think there is some uniqueness in Dwayne Coleman's game where he is the better pure passer. And maybe Army comes out sort of aggressive out of the gates on second and short plays. They throw deep. They throw deep to Noah Short or Casey Reynolds to kind of open up holes in the middle for Kanye Udo and open up the edge for Tyler Robinson and Noah Short, who have both been non-existent the past couple weeks after Noah Short had an amazing start to the season with over 10 yards per carry. And then Tyler Robinson, of course, coming back from injury. So I think if Dwayne Coleman starts, there is plenty of potential for Army to open up that North Texas run game and have a really balanced attack, or North Texas defense have a really balanced attack. If Bryson Daly plays, I say there's the same potential, but more so, I think you're just going to see Army control the clock more and just tire out a North Texas defense that really has struggled to defend anyone this year.
I think that's the big key right there. I mean, North Texas hasn't been able to stop really anybody. And Army presents so many challenges, especially if Bryson Daly plays. It's just the things that he can do. Um, just really makes it difficult for North Texas. But I think the really interesting thing with this game is just talk about the contrasting styles between these two teams. North Texas wants to throw it all over the yard. They're very good at it. Um, this I expect this game to be high scoring, like you said. But I just think Army being able to control the clock, control the line of scrimmage, in my opinion, is just going to be too much for North Texas. It's clear. It's clear though that this is the toughest opponent Army has played to date. Obviously, moving forward, they will play some tougher opponents. But North Texas is having a very solid year and is a very solid football team.
Just absolutely. North Texas is a candidate to play a Power Five team in a bowl game. I should know for the AAC. But yeah, like you said, like this is Army's first true test. Perhaps if Mike Houston was fired earlier from ECU, that would have been the first test. But this is Army's first test, and we'll see if the defense holds up against such a pass-heavy offense, which they seem to have held up well against UAB. UAB was particularly pass-heavy, but not as proficient as Chandler Morris has been this year. Morris is going to throw for over 4,000 yards, I think, should he stay healthy. So hopefully Army takes that one. Don't mean to be a homer, but I'm hoping that they take that one, obviously. Staying in the American for the last American, I almost forgot about this game on the schedule. We got Temple versus Tulane, and all I have to say is Temple and their bad run defense, allowing over 213 yards per game, has their work cut out for them against Mackay Hughes, who has ran for 100 yards in 4 straight games, looking to make it five, and just continuing that strong tradition of Tulane backs. I mean, Ty Spears, and even before Ty Spears, the guys that don't get as much credit, like your Darius Bradwell, Orleans Darkwa, even back in like the early 2010s, guys like that. Does It's not looking great for Temple, especially a couple weeks ago after they allowed East Carolina, or actually, sorry, last week after they allowed East Carolina to score 56 points on them. So, not looking great for the Owls. But I do think that Stan Drayton's team has been competitive enough to warrant him another year because it definitely is a slow build out there in Philadelphia.
Absolutely. And I'll continue to go back to when they played UConn. I mean, I was really impressed with how they performed against the Huskies. They should have beat us. Absolutely should have beat us. And I give them all the credit in the world for that. But Tulane is a really, really good football team. I've had them ranked for a while now. That's just a really, really solid team they got there. And when it comes to their rushing attack, I'm just going to say go watch their game last week against Charlotte and what they were able to do in that game. And I think that's all we really need to know. Yes, Temple has been competitive, and I give Coach Drayton a lot of credit, but Tulane is the significantly better football team.
Yeah, absolutely. I think Temple comes in as a 26-point underdog in that one. That one's at Ullman as well, too. So, just a lot
Great
working against
venue.
Temple. Yeah. I know you went there last year. Definitely seems like a great venue indeed. Definitely better than playing in the Superdome. Talk about two teams that either have right now or had bad venue problems in the past, playing in NFL venues and empty NFL venues. Glad Tulane has Ullman Stadium. So, which interestingly enough, rematched the first Rose Bowl, or sorry, first Sugar Bowl in 1935, Temple versus Tulane. So interesting nugget there that we always have with that with that series in the American. Now they're conference mates. So going on to the last Lambert Trophy eligible game of the weekend. Buffalo at 5-4 hosts Ball State on Tuesday, November 12th, the day after Veterans Day, and Tuesday night action. Buffalo stepped aside; they didn't play this past week after playing Akron on Saturday. And I know we said that Akron had a good chance in that game. Akron was a 1-point underdog in that one. They fell behind early, but they fought back hard And kudos to Joe Moorhead having Akron just play as good as they are late in the season. I definitely think that they're close to, I think, a bowl season or a breakthrough out there in Ohio. But Buffalo they've showed time at times that they can put up points when CJ Obuna can, take lead the offense, can throw the ball well. Um, Buffalo scores a lot of points, complements the run game, but this is a team built mostly on defense. Their offense only averages 24 points per game. Against Ball State, this should be a very tough matchup. Ball State played very tough against Miami on Tuesday night, and I expect the same too against Buffalo. This will just be a close game. I do think that Buffalo pulls it out with the game being at home and with it being in upstate New York, up in Buffalo. I do think that it probably is a lot colder in Buffalo than it is in Muncie, Indiana. I know that sounds kind of funny to say right now, but I think that plays. I think the latitude plays a factor in that one and the impact on the weather. But I think if Buffalo doesn't become bowl eligible this week, they'll do it the last week because they play Kent State. So
I think they get there this week as well. Yes, Ball State played Miami, Ohio tough, but I really feel like Mike New lost that game at the end. Like they had some opportunities to get a stop, and it was very questionable coaching decisions and time management on his part. Um, like I said, I'm a former head coach. I hate questioning coaches like that, but at the same time, like I just watched that and it's like, I feel like he really botched that from a time management perspective and some of the things that they were doing. I just was not a fan of it. Um, and like you said, I think Buffalo's going to be able to get this done. Muncie, Indiana is on the same like level from a perspective of temperatures where I'm at here in central Illinois, and it's been unseasonably warm, like the 60s even, which is crazy. So yeah, if they're in Buffalo and it gets down into the 30s at night, that could be an interesting aspect to see towards the end of that game.
yeah, I agree. I wasn't really I didn't really catch the end of Miami Ball State as I did was I was watching more of Central Michigan Bowling Green. But
Hmm.
geez, it's interesting to know because I know some Ball State fans have been calling for an end to the Mike New era. He's been there for a while, so I mean he's done a lot of great there with that program. But I know that there is some controversy. His seat is getting a little bit warm. So I guess that covers all the games this week. Just want to acknowledge another result that happened last week that we didn't really cover, that we talked a lot about. UMass, they fought hard against Mississippi State, ended up not pulling it out. But I think there is still a lot of good to draw from that for Don Brown's team. They did lose by I think it was 41-20. I think it was. They scored a late touchdown, but they led 10
45.
45, okay, 45-20. They did score a late touchdown, but they looked good early on. I think the turning point as I was watching that game was there was an interception, but they were called for a questionable roughing the passer penalty, and Mississippi State ended up scoring a touchdown on that drive, turning the game around. But I think Don Brown's team is well prepared for MAC play. This is a tough team. I just think that if there's anything to fix, it's just the offensive line, really. Whether they need to dip into the portal and get better or get offensive linemen, experienced offensive linemen from the FCS level, or something. But um, I mean, they have their quarterback of the future, Namad Haston. But I mean, they have not been protecting Tyson Apumachan very well. So, but just a lot of good to draw from UMass. It's still a tough year, but they are rested. They're going to be rested when they face Liberty, which will be interesting because Liberty plays down to competition, as we all know.
Very much so. Again, we got to give UMass credit. We talked about that game against Mississippi State probably a lot more than we thought we were going to. But like you said, they had a very solid showing in that game. Um, is like you said, that's the weakness for them is that offensive line. I think that they will hit the portal hard to fix that because they're not as far away as people think, and that's what we tried to talk about last week. Is like they have pieces and they have spurts where they show it, and you're like, okay, they can do some things, and It's just they got to put everything together. And Coach Brown knows that. I mean, he's a fantastic coach. We all know that. And I trust that he's going to be able to get right the ship. And they played very well this year against MAC opponents. So if I was a UMass Minuteman fan, I would be encouraged going into next season.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I would say the same thing too. And there's just little glimpses of hope that you see here and there. They just got to put it together. Like last year, they beat New Mexico State on the road at week 0. And of course, Army's last loss to date is against UMass, and UMass beat them also on the road. So there's just little glimpses. And I know that Coach Brown has been drawing very well from the portal with Pumachan. Last year,
Mhm.
Anthony Simpson had almost 800 receiving yards from the portal or from UMass. This year, Jacoby Keeney James is having a really good year at receiver, and he could cause UConn secondary some trouble too in a few weeks. So, I mean, I think he'll put the pieces together in the portal in the offseason. But man, I mean, UMass fans, I just hope you keep your head up. We were wrong on that one, but man, like there's just a lot to look forward to.
Absolutely. Then I think the other game that we didn't talk about directly was Penn State and Washington. We
That's right.
mentioned it.
Yeah.
We definitely mentioned it, and I think the point that you made about the game being later obviously helps Washington. I think this is a really interesting situation between these two teams. Penn State's clearly the better team, but this is a big letdown opportunity for them. It's also a letdown opportunity for Washington because they're coming off of a huge win against one of their rivals in USC. Traveling across the country always plays a factor into these games too. I definitely think Penn State's going to win the football game, but I think they need to win convincingly to convince not only their fans but the rest of college football as well. Like, okay, last week, yes, we lost to a good Ohio State team, but we're still an elite team here.
Yeah, I agree too. And I think about it as well. I don't think really many of their conference wins have been convincing, especially against
Right.
lower competition. I think about the UCLA game, which of course UCLA scored a late touchdown to make it, I mean, more interesting than it was. But even that game was like 27-3 at
Hmm.
its peak, really, for Penn State. So I think it's a great point too. I don't know if they'll be able to run up the score because I mean Tulane's offense, or sorry, I don't know what I said Tulane. Penn State's offense is very kind of vanilla. Honestly, it's not as explosive
Yeah.
as other James Franklin teams, but maybe I think there is potential for them to definitely shut down Washington's offense because Washington's offense is not, they have definitely dropped off from last year's great team with Michael Penix and Romo Odunze. So definitely interesting game. I think the reason we forgot to talk about it is it's on Peacock. So I mean, I think it's just natural for us to forget about it.
Yeah.
Um,
Well, plus we mentioned it too when we were talking about it.
yeah, I think we're just kind of I guess maybe there's like Penn State fatigue at this point where it's like, oh, they didn't beat Ohio State. Just get your 3 wins and get to the playoff, and we'll talk about you again.
Right, right.
So, that closes out this week. Another great week of Lambert Trophy play ahead of us. Bobby, do you have anything final to add before we sign off?
Well, as always, thank you, Omar, for having me. Love these discussions that we have each and every week. And I hope that our discussions provide insight and perspective into Northeast football, something that we're both obviously passionate about. Um, and I just hope people from across the country understand the importance of Northeast football, the importance of the Lambert Trophy. This is where football was started, where college football was created, the game that we love, and I hope we're able to bring that to you guys each and every week.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, it's great you mentioned where football started, where the game was created, because back in the day, and I think I mentioned this on a prior episode, playing and beating a team from the East and in the East was a rite of passage. And maybe we're
Mm-hmm.
seeing a return to tradition where it's not so much a rite of passage, but where with the Big Ten going from sea to shining sea, the ACC going from sea to shining sea, where we're seeing more of these teams play at in the Northeast, and maybe not exactly rite of passage, but with the heightened stakes of the Lambert Trophy. Excuse me. But until next time, everyone. Bobby, thanks again for joining, especially with how late it is out there in Illinois. Thanks for watching or listening, everyone. And until next time, everyone, peace, love, and soul, and burger popper.